Hi everyone, we're back live again at the Rutgers NJIT kind of combined thing that we've got going on here. Quickly retweet a couple things over here. But if you want to be able to follow along with everything, follow the Scicomm Monday account, follow with the Rutgers NJIT Scicomm hashtag. Everything we do will be under that hashtag today. And then if you also have any further questions, feel free to tweet me at my personal handle as well. So we're live here with Tony Cullen, and he does a lot of invasive species plant stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with things to let people know, like, how'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm a non-traditional student. You might be able to tell by the gray in my beard, but I actually started off. I kind of did my academics in pieces. I worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for about 12 years, and I was kind of a jack of all trades. I did public outreach, so talking to school groups and such. I did maintenance work. I did biology work, and really what drew me back into academics was I helped graduate students out with their project at the refuge, and so I got to do all sorts of cool work. I got to do turtle work and bat work before white nose was a thing when it was first appearing on the scene, and
before
so I got to
devastated everything.
Yeah, before it devastated everything, and so the list goes on. So through working with those projects, I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school. And so once I finished my undergrad degree, I started applying to programs, and I found myself here at Rutgers Nork, it's a joint program. That's why it's NJIT and Rutgers, which is great.
Which I learned this week. I didn't know. I was just assuming it was Rutgers, and I was like, oh no, we're actually part of this. I'm like, oh, that's really neat. Like, it's always interesting, like when universities can combine together and like help each other out. So it's a cool.
And not all departments are combined, but the biology department happens to be federated, which is nice because you get basically double the amount of professors to play off of. Anyway, but back to me. Anyway, so the last 5 years now, I've been doing work on invasive plant species. I'm a plant community ecologist. That's my thing. And let's see. And so that's where I'm at now. Hoping to finish up soon in the next year or so.
Right.
Yeah, on the tail end of things.
So why don't you, just for everyone out there, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in. This is more of an Ask Me Anything kind of format. So any questions you have, shoot them in and we'll do our best to answer them. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the species that you work with plants and how they're invasive and how they're invading across the region.
Sure. So what's really neat about my study, and like any good study, sometimes you just stumble upon it. Since I do mostly forest ecology and I look at the understory, I just happened to notice a shrub one day, and I asked the park biologist, like, what is that? And he happened to tell me, and so I looked into it more, and I realized there's two viburnum species that are currently kind of invading in the Northeast, mostly in
So what is viburnum, just for everyone out there who doesn't know, and me who doesn't know?
Yeah, of course. No, it's an excellent question. Yeah. Sometimes you get too jargony. Yeah, so viburnum is mostly an understory shrub. There are native species here in the U.S. There's about 3 that I can think of off the top of my head that are native to New Jersey. These 2 happen to be from East Asia. One is from like China and Korea and Japan. The one is solely from Japan. And so these species made their way over as horticultural specimens. They're planted because they're very pretty. They have showy...
That's always what it is. That's what it is with my species. I study invasive mute swan, and they were brought over because they're pretty.
They're pretty.
They are.
They have very showy flowers
so.
And very beautiful berries that birds love, which is part of the reason they're able to spread so well.
Right.
But the luck in this came that there just happened to be new invaders. They've been here for about 150 years in gardens, but just in the past 20 or 30 years, that sounds like a long time, but in invasion time, it's actually not that long. They've started invading, and they're now found in New York State and Pennsylvania, as well as New Jersey, and a couple other Midwestern states as well. But they're not widespread, which makes them actually ideal to study. And what I'm looking at really is how they disperse. I'm interested in propagule pressure, so how much seeds they're producing, and then how that seed is spreading, and looking at what's dispersing it, what the what the patterns of dispersal look like, and also how related are the populations to one another to get an idea of how they're kind of spreading.
So, where is it like that you do your work around here? Like where, like in New Jersey or outside of New Jersey, or is your work focused?
Sure. Well, originally I started off in Central Jersey at Morristown National Historic Park, and there's several parks around there. It's actually a nice area. There's Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. There's an Audubon. There's a couple county parks. So there's kind of this contiguous land in the middle of Central Jersey, and so that's where I started. That's where I first found them. But since I really got into it in the last like 2 or 3 years, my studies expanded to New York City, a lot of the parks around there, Queens, Bronx, also Philadelphia area. So down near, I have a site at Bryn Mawr College in Philadelphia, and I've also been going around to arboretums because since they're a horticultural species, I want to compare the native populations to the cultivated populations that exist.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Just to give everyone a quick glimpse of how close we are to some of those locations, if you look there, I don't know how well it's going to focus in.
New York City's right
if
there.
I zoom in, if you see those really tall buildings right back there, that's New York City right there.
That's Southern Manhattan.
Yeah. Things about being in a location like this is you can have access to some of those really close facilities. Like, because how long does it take you to get to Philadelphia?
Not
like maybe,
long.
Does it even
Philadelphia
in a day,
is
like
probably
a half day?
Yeah, it's like an hour and a half.
Oh,
and
that's not even. Yeah, I was
yeah.
thinking it was so much further. That's not bad at all.
And I have colleagues down there, so I can stay for a day or two. I don't have to turn around and come right back. Yeah, so it's nice. My field sites are close, and it's nice because you know, my lab does a lot of urban ecology, which I also is a love of mine, and so you kind of get to combine it because these shrubs are indiscriminate. I mean, they mostly like forest understory, but even just a little patch somewhere in the city, they could be found and have been. So
yeah, that's one of the interesting things I think isn't studied a lot of, or at least we don't hear about it a lot, is how animals and species are in cities. Like I really liked Planet Earth this too with the past one. They actually did an episode just on city animals, and it's like we need to talk about that more because so many times when we go out and talk about science, I think we just talk about those pristine habitats and where those animals are. It's neat to be able to see like how they actually interact with us in a city.
Well, yeah, and I mean, as an urban ecologist, we're aware. We listen to the statistics where we hear like 50% of people in the world now live in cities, and by 2030 it'll be 60%. And here in the Northeast, where I am, it's more like 80% live in and around cities. And so urban ecology, I mean, people have started to recognize and have recognized for a while that it's the next kind of front we need to start paying more attention to these habitats, because they're habitats.
Yeah, because driving in from where I was staying, because I was staying with Kathleen Furley, the PhD student that's hosting me. Driving from her home into the campus here, we were going through different towns, but there was no break at all. It was just like you couldn't tell where one town ended and another began, and so animals and species are living here, and so it is like you have to study it because it's not necessarily that you have a giant forest right here, and so you got to see what's happening, and that's really neat. So yeah, I can see that becoming like one of those next steps of ecology.
And like any, well, not any major metropolitan city, but like say Chicago, New York, and New Jersey, like they have like wild coyote populations, like in some of these patches, and they like even just the park by me supports skunk and fox and all sorts. So I mean, there's bountiful studies to be done that people haven't done yet. So yeah.
So with invade, like you said, you're thinking about like the birds might be eating the berries and moving your plants along. Like, how is it like most plants get moving along with the invasions like that? Like, is that a very common way for plants to be invading new environments?
Well, yeah. So I mean, with plants, it's not actually complex necessarily, but it depends on what it is. Like whether it's herbaceous, is it dying back every year? Is it a shrub or a tree? In my case, they happen to be shrubs, and because they're ornamentals, they happen to have nice berries that frugivorous birds would enjoy. And so in my case, it's probably either avian or mammal dispersed. But in other cases, it could be wind. It could be a lot of different mechanisms. Out west, it could be fire. But yeah, in my case, it's birds mostly because they have really showy, beautiful fruit. One of the shrubs has very red berry, which is attractive to birds, and the other one is like a deep blue and purple. And so, kind of the question is because I noticed the disparity in the feeding times and when things were being eaten, and so it's like, well, one of the shrubs, all the berries were disappearing during the fall migration, and so the first thing you think of is like, well, then they have a chance to be dispersed further and maybe spread into more states, where the other fruit is only eaten like in the winter after a big snowstorm when resources are kind of slim.
And those birds probably aren't moving.
And they're not probably
around.
moving
Okay.
it that far. And so
Yeah.
it becomes this, to me anyway, an interesting idea of plants having strategies. Most people roll their eyes, but as a plant ecologist, plants do have traits that lead to certain strategies. And so that's the interesting question from a theoretical point of view, but also because I worked for a government agency that's mostly does land management for so long, I also have an applied angle. Invasives interest me because a lot of national parks and refuges and any park really struggles with invasions, whether it be fish or bird or plant. So it's a really big issue.
Do you find with it being ornamental and a plant that people like, do you have a harder time convincing them that their beloved backyard plant is an actual invasive species? Because I know I have that issue with my invasive mute swans.
Yeah.
Is people love them, and because you were saying that the plants have been around for so long here, like a lot of people don't understand that mute swans are invasive because they've been here for so long. And so are you running into the issues of, one, do they understand it's invasive, and then even if they do understand it, do they not care because it's their pretty plant?
It depends. So like we had where the refuge that I worked at, we had mute swans as well. And yeah, any kind of animal or plant that is the least bit charismatic, you have more trouble convincing people. With the things that are thorny and nasty, and they're invasive as well, people are like, get rid of them.
Right.
With some of the ones that are ornamental and beautiful, it's somewhat of a struggle. But I think the more outreach I've done, I think people understand that like it's a real issue, and even if they're appealing, that there's something has to be done. And so most people are gung ho, and some people just don't care. So you got a little leeway on either side. Yeah.
So if you've got any questions, make sure you send them in, because we definitely want to make this as engaging a platform as possible. So if you've got questions about invasive plants, fire away, or studying, urban ecology, because that is interesting. Because I know where I am in Michigan, that yes, there is some urban areas, but a lot of it still is that green space, and so we don't do a lot of urban studies of things. But there are a lot of interesting things. We have a question coming in. Is bamboo invasive? Well, I guess it depends on
where you are. Yeah, but in the U.S. definitely. Yeah, and it's really invasive. It's very hard to control once it's spread because it grows under the ground, and so even if you treat what's above ground, it has this really thick matted root system that makes it pretty difficult. It's great. A lot of people use it for screens, in their yards, so they can keep out their neighbors or whatever. So in that sense, it's really nice. But yeah, at least in the U.S., it's invasive.
Yeah. So yeah, we're talking here live from Rutgers / New Jersey Institute of Technology. I keep wanting to say NGIT, and I'm so afraid I'm going to mess up the acronyms. It's going to happen
Rutgers,
at some point
NGIT,
in time.
Yeah, that's okay.
So yeah, we're talking with Tony Cullen. He's a PhD student here at Rutgers, and so any questions you have about his research with invasive plants in the greater metropolitan area here of New Jersey, or just life as a PhD student,
sure,
feel free to send those in. So yeah, like, how often do plants from people's backyards end up going into the environment and thus become a problem? Because I think that's one of the things, like, we all see these really beautiful plants and we bring them in and we don't necessarily realize that you could be spreading, while that pretty flower might look gorgeous. All of a sudden, it's like everywhere. So, like, how often does that kind of like really happen in invasive species invasions?
Yeah.
Of things,
Well,
so.
luckily, like, I don't have to be a killjoy on this question because I mean, it actually, I mean, there's this rule. There's this paper out there. It says about 10%, and that's not, you know, that there's been some debate about whether that 10% rule or holds true. So if you have 100 species, you know, 10 would maybe be invasive. You know, it's a good talking point. How whether the scientific merit is true. You know, there's probably more that needs to be done on that. But so not everything. There's some things that have been here for years and never go beyond the borders of their garden. There's other things that that do, and it's scientists and biologists have really had a hard time. I mean, the biggest question in invasive is like what traits make something invasive.
Right.
And unfortunately, I mean, it depends on where it's found and what that plant's adapted to, whether it'll invade or not. It depends on the habitat and how disturbed the habitat is. I mean, it's almost the factors around the plant that dictate sometimes more so than the plant. You know,
Okay.
there has to be resources available. So, so not too many, thankfully. You know, we don't have to be worried about. But it is good to plant native when you can. I mean, even if you don't like plants and they're not your favorite, you might like bees or birds. And if you plant native stuff that pollinators in that area are used to, or bird species are used to, you're gonna have a more vibrant yard or community than if you plant invasives.
So you plant a native species, in theory, you're going to have more insects, which could lead to a bigger diversity of birds. So if you like watching birds in your backyard, you want more birds.
Exactly.
To
Plants are the base level.
Yeah.
I know I'm like the lone plant ecologist, but yeah, I mean, you know, it's the base level, right? Primary producers. Mm-hmm. So whatever you do, you know, builds up, everything else builds off of.
So I guess this might be more towards like the gardening side of things, but what are some good plants that people could plant in their backyards around the greater New Jersey area that might be better than, say, the shrubs that you study?
Yeah, well, so there's several native viburnums. There's I don't want to use the Latin name because nobody has this like.
Have fun remembering what that is.
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's Viburnum dentatum, and then I was like, oh, that's not. But no, there's several native. There's the black haw viburnum, which it kind of has like a cherry-like leaf and the berries. There's the native, the dentatum, which I'm blanking on the name, and there is also. I'm blank on that. But there's several viburnum
totally
species.
Put you
Yeah,
on the spot.
I know. No, it's fine. There's several viburnum species that are nice. There's sweet pepper bush. There's bayberry. There's native blueberry. So you know, I have 2 young kids, and so like if you plant native blueberries or blackberries, you know, have something delicious in the summer that you can kind of pick at. And
they are so good fresh off the vine.
They are really great. Yeah, and there's native roses in this area. I mean, there's plenty to choose from. It's just getting those things out there and letting people know that they're available. I actually worked at a greenhouse. That's probably why I'm into plants. Before I got into what I did, and for about 7 years, and a lot of what's carried in greenhouses is non-native, but there has been a push, I would say, within the past 10 years of some greenhouses to carry more native species. So.
Do you think it's a push by the scientists to help educate greenhouses more, or is like the greenhouse operators trying to just be more educated in what they're doing? Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both. I think some greenhouse operators are really conscious and they want to, you know, they realize their role and to play, and they try to do it. And then some of it's outside literature and public outreach. It's not just writing and publishing a paper. It's actually going and talking to people that on the ground that do that stuff. Right. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, heck, I do all this Scicomm all the time, and so like I'll be the first one to say yes. While you know publishing your journal articles is very important, you have to take it beyond that to be able to reach out to the public, and you know those
even, scientists not necessarily in your field, because sometimes we don't always understand those particular journal articles because they're so focused that particular area. So you need someone to help explain it to you in a different way, much less if you're not even in science at all and you're, you might be interested in things. You still need someone to be able to digest it to you so that way you understand it. Because I know that there's things that even are in wildlife ecology that I'm a wildlife ecologist and I don't understand it, and I need someone to please break it down to me. So we had a question that came in asking what are some of the most damaging invasives in this particular area.
Oh yeah, that actually is an easy question. Barberry, Japanese barberry. A lot of our invasives come from Asia and some from Europe as well. So Japanese barberry is one there, and it's spiny and nasty. Multiflora rose is another. Those are both shrubs. There's Japanese honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle to shrub. There's
do you guys have Phragmites around
there's
here?
Phragmites.
That's a big issue in the Great Lakes area where I'm from.
Phragmites, Japanese knotweed. You'll notice a Japanese trend here. It doesn't actually happen that all of them are from Japan, but some have. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's actually quite a ton, but those are the major ones that have been here for a while, and there's some newer ones like the ones I'm studying that are just starting to appear on the scene and spread. Photinia is an example of one that's just starting to spread, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, do you think, because you were saying how some of these shrubs have been around for so long, but now are just becoming invasive, what all of a sudden, would key that invasion? Is it just that there maybe different species that are coming in that might be eating them, so maybe different bird species that are taking advantage of it now are kicking off that invasion, or maybe some other, factor that could be, all of a sudden, oh, that's the trigger that causes this plant to now become invasive?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I was saying before, the biggest thing that allows plants to spread is habitat disturbance. So whether that's clearing the land for a house or a park or especially in this area, there's a lot of industry, and so when that industry goes defunct and starts to crumble and things start to grow up, that's just tons of resources that these plants can take advantage of, and so that's what kind of leads a lot of these plants to spread. In my case, with mine, because like you said, the berry, I think from what my research is telling me and what I'm right in the phase of analyzing my data, is that for my specific plant, it happens to be that one berry is just more nutritious than other. So imagine you go into a candy shop, right? And you have a lot of, you have chocolates and jelly beans and lollipops. Well, out of all that junk food, because the forests I work in are highly invaded, they're all down here, and then the one invasive that happens to be a little more nutritious, the birds are eating and spreading.
Okay.
So you have to offer something, in order to get spread a lot of times, unless you're wind dispersed or, fire like out west or something that, so in my case, it happens just to be, I think, the nutritional content of the berry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think that because those areas are getting disturbed, that the native plants aren't able to keep up with that disturbance as well as the invasives, and maybe they're able to take advantage of that, and thus, the birds are saying, oh, there's more of this, and now we like it, and we're learning? Do you think they're maybe not necessarily learning, but maybe becoming more accustomed to oh, that's the plant we want to eat now? Yeah,
I mean, sometimes there's just no other options, especially, I mean, the biggest thing about invasives is they decrease biodiversity. They're right behind, habitat loss, invasives
displace habitat loss, invasives.
Invasives displace natives a lot of times. So yeah, some of it's that if you go back to that analogy with the candy shop, you don't have a lot of great options, so you're going to choose the one that's the best out of all the poor options, right? That's what you do as an individual, hopefully, and that's what, and my research, the birds are doing. It's seemingly that, because in the fall when everything's going to fruit, and some of the ones I mentioned, barberry, honeysuckle, and the viburnum species, and the multiflora rose, they're all producing berries. There's it's a sea of red berries, right? And the birds are no dummies. They know they learn, presumably, seemingly, what's good for them. So out of all the choices that they have, if there's no natives around, they're going to choose the best out of the worst, right?
Okay. So we just had someone give a shout out from Russia, so hello back to Russia.
Hello.
And I know we had someone tuning in from Canada because I recognize their handle name, so hello to Canada as well. So yeah, it's great to be able to see all of these people from all over the world being able to engage with them. So
great.
If you have any questions we've got a question. I was just going to say, so what is the best way to remove invasives and not have them return? So that's a good one because, a lot of times you think, do you burn it, but maybe it comes back? Do you have to fully remove it? Can you just cut it? Like, how do you deal with your particular invasive species?
Well, for mine, usually, so there's a whole host of pesticides out there, herbicides more specifically, that will treat it. The best way for most times is you can cut it and then treat the stump with a herbicide, and that will kill the roots, and hopefully it doesn't grow back up. The best way is persistence, though, because sometimes you'll do that and you'll have to check in a year. Mm-hmm. And that's for woody stuff. For herbaceous stuff, it might be tougher. You can do what they call a foliar spray, which is just spraying the leaves. And you spray the leaves, and hopefully it knocks it back. And sometimes they have these things where you can inject into the tree, and it will go down, and it will just totally take it out. But with any of these things, it's persistence, because plants have a whole host of ways to stay alive, and like the plant I'm working with can simply put down a branch into soil and then break off and shoot up.
That's troublesome.
And there's fruit, of course. Fruit's the primary way. So like even if you kill the shrub but the fruit's remaining, if that fruit falls off. So any time you're handling anything that's invasive, you want to kill it before it bears fruit, and then go back in 6 months or 3 months, depends on where you live, of course, in your growing season, and check it to make sure, and then check the following year to make sure. And then after that, usually you're safe. But some stuff is really persistent. So.
Okay. Yeah, and then you have like the additional problem too with the fruit. If the birds are eating it, like where are they transporting it to and trying to find where that new invasion has started? And
yeah, it's an impossible task sometimes, seemingly. But there's a lot of motivated people out there, not just that are employed by parks, but a whole host of volunteers that really want to keep things native, which is really nice. So.
All right. Yeah, so speaking of like that bird component, how do you study to see what birds are eating it and then where they're going?
Yeah, so my research only addresses what birds are eating it.
Okay.
We could have done mist netting to capture birds and see what birds are in the community, and we could have studied their feces and see what they're pooping out.
Hashtag science poop, everyone.
Yeah.
It's the best hashtag out there.
Exactly. Or what they're regurgitating. But since I wasn't, I'm more plant focused, I wanted to follow the plant story more and what the berry was doing. All we know, at least from my research right now, is that one shrub is most likely dispersed by migratory birds, so it could potentially go further, and the other is not. There's more research that needs to be done. That's with any study, right? It's the first thing you learn as a scientist. Like, great, I got my answer. And it's like, I have like a million other questions.
Yes, exactly.
So, there's a lot that needs to be done. This is only one shrub. I'm using more as a test case because it's not widespread, and it makes an interesting model species to use. There's so many different mechanisms of spread. You could spend a lifetime doing it.
Yeah, that would be interesting, especially for the ornithologists out there if they were to team with a botanist such as yourself to be able to see, okay, what species are going by that particular habitat during where the berries are there, and then seeing, okay, where they're migrating, and then be able to like start surveying along those migration routes to see, okay, are we seeing new invasions of that particular shrub?
Yeah, I think so too. That's why partnerships and collaborations are the best thing in science, and you don't have to be a jack of all trades, a master of none. The whole idea, right, behind getting a PhD is being highly specified, and so like I partnered with my lab mate Kathleen, and she helped me out with all the bird stuff, and it was great. It's always wonderful when that can happen, And the more you work with people and their specialties and take advantage of that, the more prolific you can be as a scientist. So.
Yeah, I can't agree more, because there's so much out there, and it's hard enough just to become an expert in your one particular area, much less when you start adding in all these different factors that, yes, while they do help you answer that question, it's so hard. I mean, you would be at it for 50 years and still not know everything you need to know.
And that's why science communication is important, and getting your message out and hopefully talking to other people and scientists,
Yeah, because I mean, you never know. There could be an ornithologist out there that's watching it that, like,
Sure.
oh, I study migrants that go through the East Coast, and that's something I could go look for to see if there's shrubs along the way.
I'll be at ESA in Portland. No.
Awesome. Great plug. I see we're running out of time here, so if you have any other questions, feel free to tweet us. I'll make sure I get those questions sent off to Anthony, and we'll get the answers for those questions. In the meantime, just to let you all know, follow along with the at Scicomm handle because we'll be doing more talks later today. I believe our next one is with Rebecca Penko. And we'll be discussing her work. Follow along with the hashtag for Rutgers, NJIT, Scicomm. Everything I'm doing on this trip is underneath that particular hashtag. And then if you want to get a hold of me personally, you can tweet me at Wildlife BioGal. So either one of those handles will work for getting a hold of us for further questions. So thank you so much for being on. This was great. I love my invasive species stuff, so I'm always game for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And then for everyone out there, if you're in your gardens planting, make sure you plant native. Double check what it is you're planting and help out that local community, because you never know. You might get a really cool bird that shows up in your backyard if you plant native. So, all right, we'll see you guys in a little bit, because I believe we're broadcasting at 11 o'clock with Rebecca. So we'll see you all shortly. Thank you.